Hey 3DMJers, Nick Liccamelli here, the Team Injury Reduction and Management Specialist. Today, I'm here to answer a very common question that I get, and it's a good question and an important question. Which type of BFR cuffs, blood flow restriction cuffs, should I buy? Okay, you're at that point where you have a good understanding of what BFR is, how it can be used, and you're ready to take that next step and invest in a set of cuffs. Where do you start, right? There are many different options at many different price points. If you don't know about BFR, I would highly suggest you checking out my free course in the 3DMJ Vault. That's a good place to start. If you'd like to further your knowledge, definitely check out the BFR Pros. We do a lot of good work over there as well. So when it comes to buying BFR cuffs and trying to figure out which ones are best, I like to consider two things. What do you want to get out of it, and what is your budget? Very similar to buying a car. You don't just show up to a dealership and ask them which car is most optimal or which car is the most effective, because it's really nuanced, right? You need to know what you want the car for. Are you getting a family car to fit 3 children in it to go to soccer practice? Or do you want to race this vehicle? Or do you want to pull or tow a heavy trailer with this vehicle? Before you set foot in a dealership, we have to figure out what you want the car for and what your budget is. Very similar to the BFR cuffs. Pretty much whatever you get is going to get the job done. Keep those two things in mind. Those are going to help guide you through this process as well. So we're going to start on the low end and kind of work our way up. And it's funny because this is kind of the evolution that I took in BFR. I started on the very low end and then eventually kind of worked my way back up as I started changing my goals of BFR. In general, we have manual cuffs that you have to tighten yourself or pump up yourself. And then we have automatic cuffs. You basically plug in a number or you let it kind of do it on its own. It's a machine that does it on its own. First, we have on the very low end, this is where I started my BFR journey. So these are generic straps. I don't even think they're a brand. And you can see there's still deodorant marks on them from all the times I used to use them, which were about $4 on Amazon, I think. Would like to think that there's probably some blood on there, sweat and tears as well. But this was definitely back from the bro days. You would just strap this and tie it manually. You would go to do your set. The narrower the cuff, the more pressure you're gonna need to achieve the amount of occlusion that's needed to be effective, okay? So keep that in mind. And higher pressures can get really uncomfortable and can leave marks and bruises on your skin. So I really wouldn't recommend something this skinny just because you're gonna have to really pull it tightly, all right? And that also brings me to the point of how tight should we make this thing? If we're doing it manually, how do we know how tight to make it? And that is a downfall of some of these manual cuffs, is that it's hard to measure just how tight you're doing it. What we have seen in the research, which isn't really reliable or repeatable, is a 6 or 7 out of 10 tightness. I think 6 or 7 out of 10 pressure is a good way to start. The one thing that I will say is that we always want to train at a percentage of full limb occlusion pressure. Full limb occlusion pressure is the amount of pressure it takes to fully restrict and cut off arterial and venous flow, okay? So think of when someone is taking your blood pressure, they pump up the cuff on your arm until they don't hear a pulse anymore. That point right there, when they pump it up when they don't hear a pulse, that is full limb occlusion pressure. What we do is we take a percentage of that. Now, a way to make sure that you're not exercising at full occlusion or more than full occlusion is to always check to see if you can feel a pulse. All right, if you're training your arms, check in your wrist. If you're training your legs, you can check at your ankle. And there's more information on that in the course, so I highly suggest you check that out too. As long as you can feel a pulse and the cuff feels relatively tight, that 6 or 7 out of 10 tightness, you're probably occluding enough and not too much to be dangerous, okay? That is not what I would recommend if you are using this with clients or athletes or patients, because if we are using it with other people that are under our care, we want to make sure that we are as safe as possible. And we want it to be repeatable too, because pressure and tightness is one way to progress or regress BFR exercise. So we want to make sure that we keep that consistent. We wouldn't want to train with different weight on the bar every time and think that we're progressing a certain way, right? So if you can, definitely try to keep limb occlusion pressure or percent limb occlusion pressure consistent throughout. The next step up from those straps is something like this. So this is another kind of manual cuff. It's a bit thicker, it's a bit softer, so it feels better on the skin. This would be for an arm, and then this would be for a leg. It's a little bigger. And basically, it's a little bit of Velcro, and you would just strap it on the arm to that general tightness of 6 out of 10. Make sure you can feel your pulse, and you can get the feeling of BFR and the benefits of BFR. A bit pricier, but nothing that's going to really break the bank. This is probably under $100 for a set of these for the arms and the legs. Moving forward from there, we have something like this. So this, you can see, has a little portal for a pump. This would be one for the arms, and this would be one for the legs, a little bit bigger. And what you do with this one is you would put it on, and then with a sphygmometer, which is like the little squishy thing that someone pumps up when you're getting your blood pressure taken, you would use that and pump the cuff up, and you would get it to a certain pressure. Now you can read the pressure on the sphygmometer. So now you know, once you don't feel your pulse anymore, and you let it out a little bit so that now you can feel the pulse, you can look at that number and you can use that from time to time, right? You have an idea of where it's gonna be. So that's a good way to kind of keep it consistent across the board. What we would recommend if you're gonna use this kind of cuff is to have some kind of way to really measure the pulse other than just with your fingers. And one way to do that would be with a Doppler ultrasound. They're gonna run you about $100, maybe $120. You would pump this up, and then you would put the ultrasound on your wrist, and you would hear it. And then you can see, okay, this is full occlusion because I don't hear it anymore. And then you can let the pressure out and take a percentage of that full occlusion pressure so that we know that we're training at a certain percentage of full occlusion. For the arms, we want to look to train at 40 to 50%. For the legs, it's going to be 50 to 80% of limb occlusion pressure. Another way that you can look at or make sure you can feel your pulse is with a pulse ox, right? So that little thing that you put on your finger, if it doesn't get a reading anymore, that means that it's not feeling the pulse. So you can be pretty sure that you're fully cutting off your arterial flow, see what number that is on the pressure gauge, and then take a percentage of that. I don't know that there's any research on like an Apple Watch, or like a Fitbit or something like that. I would imagine it would be an okay way to gauge that, but I haven't seen any evidence on those things. It's going to cost you anywhere from probably $300 to $400, I would say. Maybe more, maybe less, depending on what you need, because you would need to buy the sphygmometer to pump it up. You would also need an ultrasound machine or a pulse ox or something to measure that pressure, right? Because there's really no use of having the pressure gauge to measure the pressure without a way to measure your pulse, because then you're just going to measure an arbitrary pressure and you don't know if you're at full limb occlusion pressure or not. So then you can't take a percentage of anything. So if you're going to get the one with the actual pump with the pressure gauge, you're going to need some way to measure the limb occlusion pressure. And then the last version that I have is an automatic cuff. So it looks very much the same as the other one. It has a little port here where you could see where the pump is going to go. This is what the automatic pump would look like. Basically, it has this hose attached to it, and you would take the end of the hose and simply attach it into the port, put it on your arm or your leg, and then you can actually, in here, you can have it find your limb occlusion pressure, your full limb occlusion pressure, and it will take a percentage of it. So I can punch in there 50% limb occlusion pressure and press go. It will pump up all the way until it's fully occluded, and then it will slowly let air out until it's 50% of full occlusion. Done. and then you can detach the hose and you can start your BFR exercise. If you know your limb occlusion pressure from a previous time using it, you can say it's 140 millimeters of mercury. You can just punch in 140 millimeters of mercury and press go. Pumps it right up to 140, boom, detach it, and you're good to go. Very quick, very efficient, and very reliable. What this machine will also do is it will auto-regulate the pressure. So if you are performing a bicep curl, the pressure in your arm is going to change as you're flexing your bicep, right? Because the muscle is pushing on the cuff, right? So that pressure is going to change. What this will do is it will keep a consistent pressure in that cuff. So as you do your exercise, the cuff will inflate slightly and deflate slightly depending on what's happening in the target muscle. The other cuffs don't do that. They don't have that auto-regulation feature. I'm involved in some research now that we're actually looking to see, do we need that feature? Is it important? Is it better for safety? Is it better for effectiveness, right? Is it better for comfort? Because those are all things that could be barriers to blood flow restriction training, not so much with like the athlete who's relatively healthy, but those with blood pressure issues or who are not very tolerant to like pain with exercise, like most of us are, that could be a great way if we can kind of decrease some discomfort of BFR. A great way for them to still get the benefit of it without having that barrier in there. So as far as price points, depending on how many cuffs you get, depending on which model you get, so some of those different models from different companies as well have different features, right? Some have that auto-regulation feature, some don't have that, some don't have the ability to plug in the specific pressure. It will just take the limb occlusion pressure every single time. So it could be a little cumbersome, it could be a little bit less efficient because the machine has to pump all the way up and then slowly let it out and then find the pressure. Versus if you do it 3 days a week and you already know your pressure, you can just punch it right in and it'll just pump it up and you're good to go. That's gonna cost you anywhere from like $300 all the way up to like $900 to $1,000, depending on, again, how many cuffs you get and which model you get. And then on the far end of the spectrum, we have more expensive units, in the thousands of dollars for these units. They have every bell and whistle you could possibly think of. Research shows us that they are no more effective or safe than some of the ones that we've showed you in this video, not including the Amazon straps. But they're there and they're great units. They're really great units. But I think for most of us watching this for our purposes, I don't know that we need that. I think they're important for research because we want to be as consistent and as reliable as possible. For just the average bodybuilder, powerlifter who's trying to use some BFR, sometimes it's not always affordable or necessary. I hope that this video helped answer that question. I have no affiliation with any cuff manufacturer because I do participate in research on BFR, so that would be a huge conflict of interest. But if you have any questions about specific products or companies, feel free to reach out to me privately, and I will be more than happy to talk about the experiences that I've had with different products and just kind of give an unbiased opinion because I have no interest outside of just trying to help you make the best decision, okay? Check out the free course in the 3DMJ Vault and also check out the content over at the BFR Pros. And if I can help at all, please let me know. All right, take care.